Sometimes we believe that if we observe enough repetitions, the hidden rule of the world will reveal itself. But perhaps what we call an explanation is not only a pattern we discover, but also a story about where we decide the story begins. There is no why in the world. Cultural hegemony. Cultural hegemony is a concept proposed by Antonio Gramsci, referring to the process by which a dominant group presents its worldview as if it were a universal truth, leading other groups to accept it naturally. In history and politics, this does not simply mean the exercise of power. It functions as a narrative device that determines where the causal chain of past events is considered to begin. We often ask the question, why, about events. However, this question usually does not explore the entire chain of causation. Rather, it resembles the act of cutting that chain at a particular point. Depending on where that starting point is placed, the world can be reconstructed into a completely different story. To understand this mechanism, let us imagine a hypothetical debate surrounding Russia's annexation of Crimea, 2014, and the US-led NATO bombing of Yugoslavia, 1999. Hypothetical debate. The endless why. A. Why did Russia attack and annex Crimea? That is clearly an act of aggression. It violates international law and ignores Ukraine's sovereignty. R. Aggression. That happened because of the pro-Western coup in Ukraine in 2014, the Maidan Revolution. Most residents of Crimea are ethnically Russian, and they needed protection. Besides, the United States did not honor the Budapest Memorandum of 1994. Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons in exchange for security assurances from Russia, the United States, and the United Kingdom. Yet you continued expanding NATO eastward. Why did you do that? A. The Budapest Memorandum. That was simply an agreement after the collapse of the Soviet Union. NATO expansion was the voluntary choice of each country, not a forced invasion. Why are you invoking promises from the Soviet era to justify present actions? The countries of Eastern Europe wanted to escape Soviet domination in the 1990s. Why couldn't you accept the collapse of communism, like Czechoslovakia during the Velvet Revolution in 1989, or the states that emerged from the conflicts of Yugoslavia in the 1990s? R. Yugoslavia? That is ironic. Why did the United States bomb Yugoslavia in 1999 through NATO airstrikes? You destroyed civilian infrastructure under the pretext of protecting Kosovo Albanians. That intervention had no authorization from the UN Security Council. Why did you do that? Was it not part of Western hegemony, attempting to suppress Slavic nationalism? A. That was to prevent genocide. The Milosevic regime was committing atrocities in Kosovo. Why do you distort that as an invasion? It originated from the Yugoslav wars of the early 1990s when Serbia attacked Croatia and Bosnia. Why was your Slavic nationalism so violent? R. The Yugoslav wars. They happened because the West tried to divide the Balkans after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Why did the United States support Croatian independence and provide arms in the early 1990s? Was that not part of American hegemonic expansion after the Cold War? Why do you always package imperialism in the language of human rights? A. The Cold War. That began when the Soviet Union occupied Eastern Europe in the 1940s. Why did Stalin turn Czechoslovakia into a communist state? That was because the debate falls into an infinite loop. Each why pulls another link from the past, yet it never reaches an end. In the Western narrative, the story begins with Russia's aggression in Crimea. In the Russian narrative, it begins with NATO expansion or the political upheaval in Ukraine. The bombing of Yugoslavia is interpreted in a similar way. In Western accounts, it is framed as humanitarian intervention, while in Russian accounts, it is seen as an illegal military attack. Language further reinforces these narratives. In English discourse, the dominant term is annexation, whereas in Russian narratives, words such as protection or restoration are often used. Even when referring to the same event, the choice of words alters the structure of causality and the moral judgment attached to it. Through this process, the world is reconstructed into a simple moral dichotomy. The in-group becomes the righteous victim, while the out-group is cast as the source of evil. This is precisely where Gramsci's concept of cultural hegemony operates. Once a particular narrative becomes accepted as the universal explanation, it begins to determine the very starting point of the event itself. In the end, rather than examining the entire chain of causes, we choose where the story begins. And the point we choose is what we call why. But cultural hegemony is not limited to politics. Even when we believe we have left ideology behind, the structure often remains the same. An explanation appears only after we decide where the story begins. Again and again, humans attempt to rebuild explanations for their own behavior. This time not through morality or philosophy, but through models that promise to reveal the logic of human choice. There is no why in the world. Economics. Around the 18th century, another peculiar type of human appeared in the history of human thought, one whose arrogance had risen all the way to the top of its head. Their aim, as with so many humans before them, was to explain the human, and to explain why, but their method was rather different. Two ways of seeing. Iran, February 28th, 2026. Here are two different lenses through which the world may be viewed. View 1. After the Trump administration withdrew from the nuclear agreement in 2018, Iran's central bank faced an extreme shortage of US dollars. In an attempt to prevent the price of basic goods from exploding, the government introduced a dual exchange rate system. For essential imports, $1 equals 42,000 rials, official low rate. For all other transactions, market rate, $1 equals 600,000 rials or more. This policy immediately created a powerful incentive. Privileged groups were allocated cheap dollars under the label of essential goods imports, then resold them on the free market for profits exceeding 14 times their original value. In a game with no risk and astronomical profit, any rational human being would have chosen corruption, and in fact they did. Meanwhile, ordinary citizens grew more desperate as black market prices soared precisely, while the government insisted it was protecting basic necessities. This led to anti-government protests, and by February 28, 2026, became part of the justification for war. View 2. People believe numbers created the anger, but in truth it was the collapse of expectation that produced reality. From a Spinozist perspective, human beings possess a drive to preserve their own existence, conatus. The citizens came into the streets not because of exchange rate figures themselves, but because they realized that the deception of others was diminishing their own capacity to survive. What emerged was the transformation of sorrow into anger. War is not the result of economic indicators. It is the grinding sound produced when bodies, each moved by different desires, collide. The birth of a new human, economics, as axiom. This new type of human would probably have found an explanation like, view 1 more interesting, more rational, and more commonsensical. So they began collecting, organizing, and generalizing the principles hidden behind human choice. Every choice involves a trade-off. The cost of something is what must be given up to get it. Rational decisions are made at the margin. People respond to incentives. Free trade can make everyone better off. Markets are usually a good way to organize economic activity. Governments can sometimes improve market outcomes. A country's standard of living depends on its ability to produce goods and services. If too much money is printed, prices rise. In the short run, inflation and unemployment are often in tension, We now call this economics. But these principles are rather different from the laws of physics. When physics explains why a stone falls, it does not quietly smuggle in a judgment about what is desirable. Economics, by contrast, often uses words such as efficient, inefficient, distortion, and rational, mixing description and value judgment inside the same sentence. The fact that a court verdict was read aloud at 8 p.m. rather than 5 p.m., and the fact that the solemn text of that verdict was written by ordinary humans who change their underwear every morning, just like we do, makes one begin to doubt the verdict's absolute authority. The same is true of economics. Behind those formulas that appear so rigorous, there are, in the end, the values and choices of humans who also change their underwear. Yet amusingly enough, economists may not regard those values as any profound defect in economics at all. An unintended system, the truth of the wealth of nations. When Adam Smith wrote The Wealth of Nations in 1776, his inner motive may in fact have been rather impure. Perhaps Smith simply wanted to justify the idea that Britain was not as poor as people believed it to be. He redefined wealth not as the gold sitting in a king's treasury, but as the total quantity of goods and services consumed by the nation as a whole, and from there advanced a brilliant claim. It is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own interest. The core of the wealth of nations was not a story of noble intention, but an explanation of a sophisticated system produced by individual selfishness and indifference. It was, in a sense, a highly plausible excuse built on a less than noble view of human nature, the claim that the world can function even without good intentions. And perhaps that is precisely what makes economics feel so convincing. The content of the theory, self-interest, and the motive from which the theory emerged, the desire for justification, so closely resemble one another. A truly persuasive explanation proves itself by reproducing the same pattern at every scale, whether in grand history or in the inner motives of a single person. The limits of prediction. Like other disciplines, economics certainly possesses utility and predictive power. Governments and firms do in fact use these principles to set prices and design policy, and yet its predictions do not always succeed. Consider a simple example. One person has the authority to divide $100. The other person can only accept or reject the offer. If the offer is rejected, both receive nothing. According to the classical assumption, this is what should happen. Human beings are rational and will choose the option that gives them more money. Therefore, the proposer will offer the smallest amount possible, and the responder will accept it, because even $1 is better than zero. This is what classical assumptions, those underlying Mankiw's famous principles, would lead us to expect. The proposer gives as little as possible, perhaps $1 out of 100, and the responder accepts, because receiving even $1 is preferable to receiving nothing. But what do experiments show? Across many countries, when the proposer offers an amount judged to be too small, responders repeatedly reject it. In other words, they choose an outcome in which both sides receive $0, simply because the offer feels unfair. They give up money itself in order to preserve fairness. This is a result that classical models struggle to explain. So economics evolved. It began to describe, with increasing mathematical precision and empirical sophistication, psychological tendencies such as loss aversion, the idea that people feel losses roughly twice as painfully as gains, and the human tendency to pursue fairness almost instinctively. In this way, scenes that classical economics could not explain began to be translated once again through the languages of behavioral economics and experimental economics. Rejecting an unfair offer was no longer dismissed as irrational whim. It became a predictable pattern. This explanation is certainly stronger than classical economics, but that is precisely why it is more suspicious. Our explanations have become more precise. Yet it remains unclear whether this precision has revealed more of the human being, or whether it has merely cut the human being apart into pieces that are easier to explain.